At the divorce hearing, my husband was full of arrogance. "You'll never touch my money again." The words echoed through the courtroom so clearly that even the people seated in the back row turned their heads. His mistress smiled beside him, crossing one leg over the other as if she were attending a celebration instead of a legal proceeding. "She doesn't deserve a single dime," she said. A few people exchanged uncomfortable glances. I didn't respond. I simply reached into my purse and slid a sealed envelope across the table. The judge opened it, skimmed the first page, then unexpectedly burst out laughing. Not a cruel laugh. Not a mocking laugh. The kind of laugh someone makes when they suddenly discover something they weren't expecting. He leaned back in his chair and quietly said, "Oh, this is good." The color drained from my husband's face. His mistress stopped smiling, and for the first time in months I knew something they didn't. My name is Sarah Mitchell. I was 42 years old the day my marriage officially collapsed in public. The strange thing is that by then I wasn't grieving the marriage anymore. I was grieving the woman I used to be. For 19 years I had been Daniel Mitchell's wife. For 19 years I had believed we were building something together. A home, a future, a family. The usual things people promise each other when they stand in front of friends and relatives and swear forever. I met Daniel when I was 23. He was confident without seeming arrogant, funny without trying too hard. The kind of man who could walk into a room and make everyone feel comfortable. Back then, I worked as a nurse at a small hospital outside Chicago. Daniel was starting a construction company with 2 employees and a borrowed pickup truck. We were not rich. We were barely surviving. I worked double shifts. He worked weekends. Some months we had to choose between repairing the car and replacing the refrigerator. But we laughed a lot. At least I thought we did. As the years passed, his business grew. The pickup truck became a fleet. The rented office became a building with his name on the front. People started introducing him as a successful businessman. Meanwhile, I continued working in healthcare. Not because I had to, because I loved it. I liked helping people. I liked knowing my work mattered. Daniel used to say he admired that about me. Later, he stopped saying it. Success changed him slowly. The way rust spreads across metal. Almost invisible at first, then impossible to ignore. He began talking differently, walking differently, treating people differently, especially me. Somewhere along the way, he stopped seeing me as a partner and started seeing me as part of the furniture, something that had always been there, something he no longer appreciated. Even then, I tried to save the marriage. God knows I tried. Marriage counseling, weekend trips, long conversations, short conversations, patience, forgiveness, more patience. Nothing worked. Because you can't repair a marriage when only one person is trying to repair it. The first time I suspected another woman existed was about 9 months before the hearing. Daniel suddenly became protective of his phone. He started taking business trips that didn't appear on his company calendar. He began spending money in ways that didn't make sense. Expensive restaurants, luxury hotels, jewelry I never received. Whenever I asked questions, he acted offended, as if I were the problem, as if trust meant never asking anything. The irony still amazes me. The guilty person always seems to demand trust the loudest. 3 months later, I learned her name. Vanessa Brooks. 34 years old. Attractive. Ambitious. And apparently convinced that my husband was her future husband. I found out completely by accident. Or maybe not by accident. Sometimes life gets tired of hiding the truth. I was leaving the hospital after a 14-hour shift when I saw Daniel's car parked outside a restaurant 40 minutes from our house. At first, I thought I was mistaken. Then I saw him through the window, laughing, holding her hand, looking happier than he had looked with me in years. I stood there for less than 30 seconds. Then I walked away. No confrontation, no screaming, no dramatic scene. Just silence. A silence that lasted much longer than either of them realized. When I finally told Daniel, I knew he didn't deny it. That hurt more than the affair itself. He simply stared at me and said, "Maybe we both deserve a fresh start." Not, "I'm sorry." Not, "I made a mistake." Just a fresh start. As if 19 years together could be erased with a corporate phrase. 2 weeks later, he filed for divorce. Things became ugly almost immediately. His attorneys were aggressive. His attitude became colder. The man I married disappeared completely. In his place stood someone calculating and impatient. Someone determined to win. The worst part wasn't losing my husband. The worst part was watching him enjoy hurting me. The court dates began. The paperwork multiplied. Every meeting felt like a battlefield. Then came the financial disclosures. That was when things stopped making sense. Daniel claimed much less income than expected. Several assets seemed to have vanished. Accounts were missing. Transactions didn't add up. When my attorney raised questions, Daniel's legal team dismissed them as clerical errors. I wanted to believe that explanation. Life would have been easier if they were right. But something felt wrong. Something deeper than a cheating husband trying to protect his money. The feeling stayed with me, growing stronger every day. And eventually that feeling led me somewhere neither Daniel nor Vanessa ever expected. Back in the courtroom, the judge continued reading. His expression changed. The amusement faded. Curiosity replaced it. Then concentration. Daniel shifted in his chair. Vanessa's confidence began to crack. My attorney glanced at me. I kept my face neutral. Months earlier, I would have been terrified. Now I was simply waiting. The judge lowered the letter and looked directly at my husband. "Mr. Mitchell," he said calmly. Daniel straightened his tie. "Yes, Your Honor." The judge tapped the envelope against the table. "I believe we're going to need some clarification." The room fell silent. And suddenly, for the first time since the divorce began, Daniel looked nervous. The judge's words hung in the air like smoke. "I believe we're going to need some clarification." For a brief moment, nobody moved. Nobody spoke. Then Daniel's attorney leaned forward and forced a polite smile. "I'm sure we can answer any questions the court may have, Your Honor." The judge nodded slowly. "I'm sure you can." Something in his tone made the entire room uncomfortable. The hearing continued, but the atmosphere had changed. Daniel felt it. Vanessa felt it. And I certainly felt it. The confidence they had carried into that courtroom was beginning to crack. The judge scheduled an additional review and requested supporting documentation connected to several transactions mentioned in my letter. Nothing dramatic happened that day. No handcuffs. No verdict. No public humiliation. But as I walked out of the courthouse, I noticed something I hadn't seen in months. Daniel wasn't smiling. That evening, I sat alone in my apartment and watched rain slide down the kitchen window. The place was small compared to the house I'd lived in for nearly 2 decades. The furniture didn't match. The walls were plain. The silence was different, but it was honest. There was something comforting about that. For months I had been surrounded by lies. Now at least I knew where I stood. My phone buzzed on the counter. A text from my attorney, Karen. "Judge requested additional financial records. Call me tomorrow." I stared at the screen. Additional records. That was exactly what Daniel didn't want. Because the deeper I looked into his finances, the more questions appeared. Questions that all traced back to the same period. The period when Vanessa entered his life. 9 months earlier, I had still been trying to save my marriage. Looking back, I can see how desperately I wanted to believe Daniel. When you've spent 19 years building a life with someone, you don't wake up one morning and decide they're a stranger. You search for explanations. Stress. Work pressure. Depression. Anything except the obvious truth. Daniel knew that. He counted on it. The changes started gradually. He began coming home later than usual. At first it was client meetings, then emergency projects, then overnight trips. His explanations always sounded reasonable. Construction projects often run behind schedule. Clients change plans. Problems happen. I understood that world. I had watched him build the company from nothing. But something felt off, not because of what he said, because of how he said it. Every answer seemed rehearsed. Every explanation arrived too quickly. One night I asked a simple question while we were eating dinner. "What city are you visiting next week?" He froze for less than a second. Most people wouldn't have noticed. I did. "Milwaukee." Then he immediately changed the subject. That moment stayed with me. Not because it proved anything, because it reminded me of something. When people tell the truth, they usually remember where they're going. 3 weeks later, another strange thing happened. I was balancing our household expenses when I noticed a charge from a luxury hotel downtown. Nearly $700. Daniel wasn't traveling that week. I knew because he'd been home every night. When I asked him about it, he barely glanced at the statement. "Business dinner. $700. For dinner." I almost laughed. Instead, I nodded. The next month brought another charge. Then another. Then another. Hotels. Restaurants. Spa appointments. Things that had absolutely nothing to do with construction. The pattern became impossible to ignore. Still, I wasn't ready for the truth. Not yet. The truth arrived one Tuesday evening. I had just finished a brutal shift at the hospital. One of those days that leaves your feet aching and your brain exhausted. The kind of day when all you want is a shower and sleep. Traffic was unusually heavy, so I took an alternate route home. That's when I saw Daniel's truck, parked outside an upscale restaurant nearly 40 minutes from our neighborhood. At first, I assumed he was meeting a client. Then I looked through the front window and saw them. Daniel sat across from a woman with long dark hair, Vanessa, though I didn't know her name yet. They weren't discussing business. They weren't hiding. They looked comfortable, familiar, intimate, like people who had spent many evenings together. I watched Daniel reach across the table and take her hand. The gesture was small, natural, practiced. That hurt more than anything, because it told me this wasn't new. This wasn't a mistake. This wasn't a moment of weakness. This was a relationship, a real one. I stood outside for perhaps 20 seconds. Then I turned around and walked back to my car. No tears. No scene. No confrontation. The crying came later. Alone. Where nobody could see it. For the next several weeks I paid attention. Not because I wanted revenge. Because I needed the truth. The truth has a strange quality. Once you suspect it exists, you can't stop looking for it. I noticed Daniel smiling at messages he never shared. I noticed him protecting his phone. I noticed how quickly he became irritated whenever I asked normal questions. One evening he stepped into the backyard to take a call. The sliding door wasn't completely closed. I heard him laugh. A laugh I hadn't heard in years. Then he said something that settled everything. "I miss you too." The words landed like a physical blow. Not because they surprised me, because they confirmed what I already knew. Later that night I sat in bed staring at the ceiling while Daniel slept beside me. Or pretended to sleep. I remember realizing something important. The marriage was already over. The paperwork just hadn't caught up yet. 2 weeks later I confronted him. Not dramatically. Not angrily. Just honestly. "Who is she?" Daniel looked at me for several seconds. No denial. No confusion. No performance. Just silence. Then he sighed. And that was somehow worse. Because guilty people deny. Daniel didn't bother. "Her name is Vanessa." The room felt smaller. My hands felt cold. "How long?" "Several months." Several months. The phrase sounded absurdly small compared to what it actually meant. 19 years on one side, several months on the other. And somehow he had chosen. The divorce filing arrived shortly afterward. What I didn't know then was that the affair wasn't the biggest secret Daniel was hiding. Not even close. Because a few weeks later, while reviewing financial records for the divorce, I discovered a transfer worth nearly $80,000. Money that had disappeared from an account we jointly owned. Money Daniel claimed didn't exist. Money that had gone somewhere. I stared at the transaction for nearly a minute. Then I checked it again. And again. The number never changed. $80,000. Gone. And that was the moment I realized this story wasn't just about infidelity anymore. Something much bigger was hiding beneath the surface. I stared at the transaction until the numbers began to blur. $80,000. Not 800. Not 8,000. 80,000. Gone. I checked the date again. Then the account number. Then the routing information. Everything matched. The money had left one of our joint accounts 6 months earlier. The problem was simple. I had never authorized it. At first I assumed there had to be an explanation. A business investment. A temporary transfer. A bookkeeping mistake. But every explanation collapsed the moment I dug deeper. The account receiving the funds wasn't connected to any project I recognized. There was no invoice. No contract. No legitimate paper trail. Just money disappearing into a place that seemed designed not to be found. That discovery changed everything. Up until then, I had viewed the divorce as the painful ending of a failed marriage. Now I began wondering whether I had been living beside a stranger. The next morning I called Karen. My attorney listened quietly while I explained what I'd found. "Send me everything," she said. I forwarded the records immediately. An hour later, my phone rang. "Sarah," she said, "don't confront him." The seriousness in her voice caught my attention. "I wasn't planning to?" "Good." A pause. "Because if there's one hidden transfer, there are probably more." I sat back in my chair. The apartment suddenly felt smaller. How many more? I don't know. That answer bothered me more than any number could have. Over the next several weeks, my evenings followed the same routine. Work at the hospital. Drive home. Eat something simple. Then spend hours reviewing financial documents. Bank statements. Tax filings. Business disclosures. Investment reports. The dining table slowly disappeared beneath stacks of paper. At first, the information seemed random. Then patterns emerged. Patterns always tell a story. You just have to learn how to read them. The first thing I noticed was timing. Many unusual transactions began shortly after Vanessa entered Daniel's life. The second thing I noticed was frequency. Transfers occurred almost every month. Some large, some small, most designed to avoid attracting attention. The third thing I noticed made my stomach tighten. Several transfers appeared connected to companies I'd never heard of. Daniel owned a construction business. I knew his vendors, his suppliers, his contractors. These names were unfamiliar, very unfamiliar. One company appeared repeatedly, Stonebridge Consulting. Another was called Apex Development Solutions. The names sounded legitimate, professional, boring even, but something about them felt manufactured, like names chosen from a business name generator. One Friday night I searched public records. Stonebridge Consulting didn't appear where it should. Neither did Apex Development Solutions. I checked again. Nothing. That was when the feeling returned. The same feeling I'd had outside the restaurant. The feeling that the truth was standing directly in front of me. I just wasn't seeing all of it yet. The following Monday brought another surprise. Karen called during my lunch break. "I want you to meet someone."
Who?
"A former accountant." I frowned. "For Daniel's company?" "Used to be." That evening we met at a small coffee shop near downtown. The man looked to be in his 60s, gray hair, wire rim glasses, careful eyes, the kind of person who spent decades working with numbers. Karen introduced us. The accountant's name was Richard Barnes. He shook my hand politely, then glanced around the room before speaking. "You've found some unusual transfers." It wasn't a question. I nodded. Richard took a sip of coffee. I wondered when someone would notice. The statement sent a chill down my spine. "What does that mean?" He looked at Karen first, then back at me. "Your husband became very interested in moving money around a few years ago." I leaned forward. "Moving money where?" That was always the problem. His expression darkened. I could never get a straight answer. For the next 30 minutes, Richard explained why he had eventually left the company. Missing documentation, questionable reimbursements, incomplete records, transfers that lacked proper approval. Nothing dramatic by itself, but together, a troubling pattern. "Did you report it?" I asked. I raised concerns. And Richard laughed softly. Not because anything was funny, because he'd clearly asked himself that question many times. I was told to focus on accounting. Silence settled between us. Then he said something I still remember word for word. "This isn't just about an affair." My pulse quickened. "What do you mean?" He folded his hands. "Affairs make people careless." I waited. But these transactions were happening before anyone knew about Vanessa. The realization hit me immediately. The affair wasn't the beginning. It was a symptom, part of something larger, something older, something more dangerous. I drove home that night with the radio off. My thoughts were too loud. The city lights blurred through the windshield as questions piled up inside my head. How long had this been happening? What else had Daniel hidden? Who knew? Who helped him? And perhaps the most disturbing question of all, had any part of our life together ever been real? When I arrived home, another envelope sat outside my apartment door. No stamp, no return address, nothing. Just my name written across the front. For several seconds I stared at it. Then I carried it inside. The envelope contained only 3 sheets of paper. Copies of wire transfers. Nothing else. No explanation. No note. No signature. I spread them across the kitchen table. Each transfer connected to accounts I had never seen before. But one detail immediately stood out. The receiving account appeared under a familiar name, Vanessa Brooks. My breath caught. The transfers weren't small. $20,000, $35,000, $15,000. Repeated over time. Money moving from places Daniel claimed didn't exist. Straight into accounts linked to his mistress. I lowered myself into a chair. For several moments I simply stared. The affair had already destroyed my marriage. Now it appeared connected to something far bigger. My phone rang. "Karen," I answered immediately. "You're not going to believe what I just found." She sighed. I was about to say the same thing. My stomach tightened. "What happened?" "The court approved additional discovery." That was good news. But Karen didn't sound relieved. She sounded concerned. "Sarah," she said carefully, "there's another company." I looked down at the paperwork scattered across my table. "Another one?" "Yes," a pause. "And whoever created it worked very hard to keep it hidden." I closed my eyes. The list kept growing. The lies, the money, the fake companies, the missing records. Every answer seemed to create 3 new questions. Then Karen said something that made the room feel suddenly cold. "Tomorrow we're meeting a forensic investigator." I swallowed. "Why?" Silence. Then, "Because I don't think your husband is just hiding assets anymore." The words hung in the air. Heavy. Unavoidable. What do you think he's hiding? Karen took a breath. When she finally spoke, her voice was almost a whisper. I think your husband may have committed a crime. I didn't sleep much that night. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw numbers. Transfers. Account numbers. Company names. Dates. The pieces were finally beginning to fit together, but the picture they formed was uglier than I had imagined. At 6 the next morning, I was already sitting at my kitchen table with a mug of coffee that had gone cold 20 minutes earlier. The stack of documents beside me looked more like a criminal investigation than a divorce case. Karen arrived shortly after 8. She wasn't alone. The forensic investigator was a woman named Rebecca Cole, early 50s, sharp eyes, calm voice, the kind of person who could make uncomfortable truths sound completely ordinary. She spent nearly 3 hours reviewing records. When she finally looked up, her expression remained professional. That worried me more than if she had looked shocked. People who work around fraud don't get shocked easily. What do you think? I asked. Rebecca folded her hands. I think someone worked very hard to make this look complicated. Karen frowned. Meaning? Rebecca pointed to several transactions. Real fraud often hides behind complexity. The goal is to make people give up before they understand what they're looking at. She tapped another page. This isn't complex. Karen leaned forward. What is it? Rebecca's answer came immediately. It's sloppy. I stared at her. Sloppy, she nodded. Whoever did this believed nobody would ever look closely. A strange feeling moved through me. Not satisfaction, not relief. Something closer to certainty. For months, Daniel had acted untouchable. Now, for the first time, I realized he might simply have been careless. Careless because he believed I would never question him. Careless because he believed I would never fight back. Careless because he believed he was smarter than everyone else. Those kinds of people usually make mistakes. Big ones. By noon, Rebecca had identified several major problems. Hidden transfers. Undisclosed accounts. Payments connected to Vanessa. Suspicious company records. Nothing had been officially proven yet. But the pattern was impossible to ignore. When the meeting ended, Karen remained behind. We sat quietly in my apartment while afternoon sunlight crossed the floor. Neither of us spoke for several minutes. Finally, she broke the silence. There's something I need to ask you. I looked up. What? How far do you want to take this? The question surprised me. What do you mean? Karen sighed. This started as a divorce. She gestured toward the mountain of evidence. It may become something else. I understood immediately. Investigations. Potential criminal exposure. Public consequences, things far bigger than dividing marital assets. For a moment I looked toward the window. People walked along the sidewalk below. Cars passed. Life continued normally. Yet my entire future seemed balanced on a single decision. I don't want revenge, I said finally. Karen studied me. I believe you. I just want the truth. She nodded. Then keep going. That night I began writing. Not because Karen suggested it. Not because the court required it. Because I needed to organize everything I had learned. At first I planned to create a simple timeline. Dates. Transactions. Events. Nothing more. But the deeper I went, the clearer the story became. A story built entirely from facts. No accusations. No emotional language. No dramatic claims. Just evidence. 1 page became 2. 2 became 5. 5 became 10. I worked until nearly midnight. Then stopped. The next evening I continued. Then again the following night. By the end of the week, I had assembled something surprisingly powerful. Not because it was clever. Because it was simple. The facts spoke for themselves. Every transfer connected to a date. Every date connected to an event. Every event connected to documentation. The entire pattern became visible. For months, Daniel had relied on confusion. Now confusion was disappearing. One evening, while reviewing the final draft, I noticed something unexpected. A single inconsistency. Small. Almost invisible. A transfer dated 3 days after Daniel claimed he had no access to a particular account. I checked the records again. Then again. My pulse accelerated. There it was. A direct contradiction. Not suspicion. Not interpretation. A contradiction. The kind judges notice immediately. The kind lawyers fear. I highlighted it and placed the document aside. By then I understood something important. The strongest evidence wasn't always the largest transaction. Sometimes it was the smallest mistake. The hearing approached quickly. Meanwhile, Daniel remained confident. Painfully confident. His attorney filed motions. Vanessa continued appearing beside him. Every report from court suggested they believed victory was inevitable. Karen and I met one final time before the hearing. We reviewed strategy, evidence, possible arguments. Then she asked the question that mattered most. Do you want to submit all of this now? I looked down at the folder. Dozens of pages, months of work, years of lies. No. Karen raised an eyebrow. No. I shook my head. Not all of it. She waited. I reached into my bag and removed a sealed envelope. A much smaller package. Inside was something different. Not a legal brief. Not a financial report. A letter. My letter. The same letter I had spent nights rewriting. Removing emotion. Removing anger. Removing everything except facts. Karen looked at it, then looked at me. You want the judge to read this? Yes. She studied my face for several seconds, then smiled. Not because she knew what would happen, because she finally understood what I was doing. The letter wasn't evidence. It was a map. A guide. A way of helping someone else see what I had spent months uncovering. The morning of the hearing arrived gray and cold. I dressed carefully. Simple navy blazer. White blouse. Nothing flashy. Nothing dramatic. I wasn't trying to impress anyone. I was trying to remain steady. Outside the courthouse, reporters stood near the entrance. Apparently, word of the financial disputes had started attracting attention. Karen met me near security. Ready? I considered the question. Was I ready? No, probably not. Nobody is truly ready to watch their marriage collapse in public. But I was ready for the truth, and that would have to be enough. We entered the courtroom. Daniel was already there. Vanessa beside him. Both looked relaxed, confident, victorious. When Daniel saw me, he smiled. The same smile he'd worn for months. The smile of a man who believed the outcome had already been decided. I returned to my seat. Karen organized her files. The judge entered. Everyone stood. The hearing began. And when the moment finally arrived, I reached into my purse, removed the envelope, and quietly slid it across the table. The judge opened it, started reading, then suddenly stopped. A slow smile appeared on his face. And for the first time all morning, Daniel's confidence disappeared. For several seconds, the courtroom was completely silent. The judge continued reading. Daniel shifted in his chair. Vanessa glanced at him, then back at the judge. Neither of them knew what was written inside the envelope. That uncertainty was already making them uncomfortable. The judge reached the second page, then the third. A faint smile touched the corner of his mouth. Finally, he placed the letter on the bench and looked directly at Daniel. Mr. Mitchell. Daniel straightened immediately. Yes, Your Honor. The judge tapped the document lightly. I have a few questions. The confidence in Daniel's face remained, but I noticed something small. His jaw tightened. Only slightly. Most people wouldn't have seen it. After 19 years of marriage, I did. The judge lifted a page. In your sworn financial disclosure, you stated that you had no control over certain accounts after February of last year. That's correct. The answer came quickly. Too quickly. The judge nodded. Then he read a date, a transaction amount, an account number, the exact information I had highlighted weeks earlier. Can you explain why records show you personally authorized a transfer from that account 3 days later? Daniel froze. Just for a second. But it was enough. His attorney leaned toward him. Daniel cleared his throat. There may be an error in the documentation. The judge looked unimpressed. An error. Possibly. The judge set the page down. Interesting. The room remained silent. Nobody wanted to interrupt. Nobody wanted to breathe. Because everyone could feel something changing. The judge continued. Then perhaps you can explain the second issue. He picked up another document. This time Daniel's attorney stood. Your Honor, we haven't reviewed these materials in full. The judge didn't even look up. You'll have an opportunity. Then he continued reading. The next 15 minutes felt surreal. One question led to another. One answer led to a contradiction. Every contradiction exposed a new problem. Not dramatic problems, not movie-style revelations. Real problems. The kind built from records and signatures and dates. The kind judges take seriously. By the time the judge reached the fourth inconsistency, Daniel no longer looked relaxed. He looked irritated, then frustrated, then worried. Vanessa wasn't smiling anymore. She sat perfectly still beside him. The woman who had looked so confident earlier now avoided eye contact with everyone in the room. Then came the first major blow. The judge lifted a page from the file Rebecca had helped us organize. Let's discuss Stonebridge Consulting. The name landed like a brick. I watched Daniel's eyes narrow. Stonebridge provided consulting services. The judge raised an eyebrow. What services? Daniel hesitated. Business consulting. The judge waited. The silence stretched. What kind of business consulting? Daniel opened his mouth, closed it, opened it again. No answer came. The judge nodded slowly. I see. His tone suggested he saw much more than Daniel realized. Karen stood. Your Honor, we'd like to submit supporting documentation related to Stonebridge Consulting. The judge accepted the documents. A few minutes later, another company appeared. Apex Development Solutions. Then another. And another. The pattern was impossible to miss now. Money moving between entities with little evidence of actual business activity. Large sums. Repeated transfers. Questionable records. Daniel's attorney objected repeatedly. The judge overruled repeatedly. Meanwhile, the courtroom atmosphere continued shifting. People weren't watching a divorce anymore. They were watching something unravel. Then Vanessa's name entered the discussion. That changed everything. Karen approached the witness stand. Your Honor, we'd also like to address several transfers connected to Ms. Vanessa Brooks. The room became even quieter. Vanessa visibly stiffened. The judge nodded. Proceed. Karen displayed the records, transfer amounts, dates, account numbers. Nothing emotional, nothing exaggerated. Just facts. Vanessa stared at the paperwork. Her face slowly lost color. The judge reviewed the documents, then looked directly at her. Ms. Brooks, were you aware of these payments? Vanessa swallowed. For the first time all morning, she seemed genuinely frightened. I don't know what those are. Karen remained calm. Are you saying these accounts do not belong to you? Vanessa hesitated. The hesitation lasted only a moment, but it was enough. No. Karen handed another document to the court. The judge studied it, then looked back at Vanessa. According to this record, they do. A murmur spread through the courtroom. Vanessa looked toward Daniel, looking for help, looking for guidance, looking for something. Daniel avoided her eyes. That moment told me everything. The partnership that had seemed so strong was breaking apart, not because of love, because pressure reveals character, and pressure was everywhere now. The judge called a short recess. The second he left the room, chaos erupted. Lawyers gathered in corners. Whispers spread through the gallery. People exchanged theories. Meanwhile, Daniel sat motionless, staring at the table. Vanessa leaned toward him. What are they talking about? He didn't answer. She asked again. Still nothing. For the first time, I realized Vanessa might not know everything. She knew enough, but not everything. And that terrified her. Karen and I stepped into the hallway. She looked more energized than I had seen her in months. He's falling apart. I nodded. Do you think the judge sees it? Karen actually laughed. The judge saw it 30 minutes ago. That answer gave me no satisfaction, only relief. Because for months I had felt like I was screaming into the wind. Now someone else finally saw what I saw. The recess ended. Everyone returned to their seats. The judge entered. The room immediately settled. He reviewed several pages silently. Then he looked directly at Daniel. His voice remained calm, professional, controlled, which somehow made the moment more frightening. Mr. Mitchell. Daniel stood. Yes, Your Honor. The judge folded his hands. Based on the information currently before this court, I have serious concerns regarding the accuracy of your disclosures. Daniel's face turned pale. The judge continued, I am ordering an immediate forensic review of all financial records connected to this matter. Nobody moved. Nobody spoke. The words landed with enormous weight. A forensic review. Exactly what Daniel had spent months trying to avoid. His attorney immediately stood. Your Honor. The judge raised a hand. The attorney sat down. The courtroom fell silent again. Then the judge delivered the sentence that changed everything. Additionally, I believe there is sufficient cause to refer portions of these records for further investigation. I heard Vanessa inhale sharply. Daniel looked as though someone had punched him. For months he had treated this divorce like a game he had already won. Now the rules had changed. The hearing ended shortly afterward. People began filing out. Reporters hurried toward the exits. Attorneys gathered documents. The noise returned. But Daniel remained seated, staring forward, motionless. Eventually, he stood and turned toward me. For a long moment, neither of us spoke. Then he asked the question I never expected to hear. How much do you know? His voice sounded different, smaller. I met his eyes, and for the first time in months, I didn't see confidence. I saw fear. I gave him a simple answer. Not enough. Because the truth was, we had only just begun. The question followed me all the way home. How much do you know? Daniel had asked it as if the answer might save him, as if there were still some version of reality where he could negotiate his way out of what was happening. But something fundamental had changed in that courtroom. For the first time since the divorce began, Daniel wasn't controlling the story anymore. The facts were. And facts don't care how persuasive you are. They don't care how much money you have. They don't care how long you've spent convincing people you're the smartest person in the room. Facts simply exist. The forensic review began the following week. What started as a divorce case quickly expanded into something much larger. Karen kept warning me to stay patient. The process would take time. She was right. It took weeks. Then months. The investigators examined everything. Business records, transfers, corporate accounts, tax filings, email correspondence. The deeper they looked, the more questions appeared. Questions Daniel couldn't answer. Questions nobody on his legal team seemed eager to discuss. One afternoon, Karen called while I was finishing paperwork at the hospital. I knew from her voice that something important had happened. They finished the preliminary report. I closed my office door. What did they find? A brief silence. Then, most of what we suspected. I sat down slowly. The chair suddenly felt unstable beneath me. What happens now? Now, she said, people start protecting themselves. I didn't fully understand what she meant. Not until the following days. That's when the cracks became impossible to ignore. Daniel's attorney withdrew from several aspects of the case. Nothing dramatic, nothing public, just quiet legal distancing. Then came reports that certain business partners were refusing new projects. Investors became cautious. Lenders began asking questions. The confidence Daniel had built his reputation on started disappearing. Not because someone attacked him, because trust was leaving the room. And trust rarely returns once it walks away. Vanessa disappeared almost completely. For weeks, nobody saw her. No social media updates, no appearances, no public support. Nothing. The woman who had sat beside Daniel so proudly in court suddenly wanted distance. I couldn't blame her. People often enjoy standing next to power. Few enjoy standing next to consequences. One evening I returned to the house. My house. For months I had referred to it as Daniel's house in my mind. Not because it legally belonged to him. Because he had convinced me I no longer belonged there. Now things were different. The temporary court orders had restored access while the financial matters continued. Walking through the front door felt strange. Familiar. Yet completely unfamiliar. The photographs remained. The furniture remained. The walls remained. But the illusion was gone. The illusion that this house represented a perfect marriage. I stood in the living room for several minutes. Not crying. Not angry. Just observing. 19 years of memories lived inside those walls. Some good. Some painful. Some now impossible to separate from the lies. My phone buzzed. A message from Karen. Call me when you can. I called immediately. She answered on the first ring. The judge issued his ruling. For a second, my heart stopped. I hadn't realized how much tension I was still carrying until that moment. What happened? Karen exhaled. The court granted your financial claims. I closed my eyes. Relief washed through me. Not excitement. Relief. The kind that arrives after carrying a heavy weight for too long. Karen continued. The concealed assets issue played a major role. I leaned against the kitchen counter. The room felt unusually quiet. What about Daniel? Another pause. He's facing several problems. That was the professional way of saying his situation had become very serious. I thanked her. We spoke for a few more minutes. Then the call ended. I stood alone in the kitchen. The same kitchen where I had cooked thousands of meals, celebrated birthdays, hosted holidays, planned vacations, argued, laughed, dreamed. For years I had believed losing my marriage would destroy me. I was wrong. The thing that nearly destroyed me wasn't losing the marriage. It was losing myself inside it. A few weeks later, I saw Daniel for the final time. Not at a hearing, not at a legal meeting, just outside a building downtown. A chance encounter. He looked older. Much older. Only a few months had passed. Yet the difference was unmistakable. The confidence was gone. The easy smile was gone. The certainty was gone. For a moment, we simply looked at each other. Two people who once shared a life. Two strangers connected by history. Finally, he spoke. How long did you know? The same question. The same need for an answer. I thought about everything that had happened. The affair. The lies. The hidden money. The courtroom. The letter. The investigation. The months of rebuilding my life. Then I gave him the truth. Long enough. He stared at me, perhaps expecting more. An accusation. A speech. A final argument. I had none to offer. Some chapters don't need dramatic endings. They just need to end. I wished him well. Not because he deserved it. Because carrying bitterness any longer would only hurt me. Then I walked away. And that was it. No grand revenge. No celebration. No applause. Just a woman continuing her life. Several months later, I sat outside a small coffee shop on a cool autumn morning. Leaves drifted across the sidewalk. People hurried to work. The city moved forward. So did I. For the first time in years, I wasn't thinking about court dates, or lawyers, or evidence, or betrayal. I was thinking about the future. A future that belonged entirely to me. At 42 years old, I had believed my life was ending. Instead, it was beginning again. Not perfectly, not magically, but honestly, and honesty turned out to be worth far more than anything Daniel had ever promised me. If there's one thing this experience taught me, it's that the truth has incredible patience. People can hide it, delay it, bury it beneath lies, but eventually it finds its way to the surface. Always, for 19 years I thought I needed my husband's love to feel secure. Then I thought I needed justice to feel whole. In the end, I needed neither. What I needed was myself. And the day I finally got myself back was the day I truly became free. If this story touched you in any way, I'd love to hear your thoughts. Have you ever had a moment when the truth changed everything? Leave a comment below and tell me where you're watching from. We share stories like this every day, stories about resilience, courage, and finding your way through life's hardest moments. If you'd like to join us on that journey, subscribe so you don't miss the next story. Until next time, take care of yourself and remember that your dignity is worth protecting.